Good afternoon. I'm going to get started. I like to start pretty well on time. I have a good friend who is a priest, and he was assigned to a new parish, and he was having daily mass every day at 7 o'clock, and he'd start, and he'd be past the prayer and into the first reading, and then people started to arrive, big groups. He said, "Why do you all come late?" And they said, "Well, the previous pastor was always late. He always started at 10 after 7, so we just adapted to that." So I think it's a good idea to be on time if I can. And now I think there may be some who are not here now. There may be some who have chosen to take a nap this afternoon. That too is Recollection in my book. No, I think I got an amen on that. Okay. Well, I'm going to talk in terms of healing of loneliness this afternoon. How can we as a church respond to this? And there are kind of four main things here. The first thing is to look at our expectations, others' expectations, and then to look at gratitude, then to look at the skill set necessary for healing loneliness, and then to look at community as a way of healing loneliness. I think these are all things that we can extend to people. And I'm going to begin with what was the first reading for Mass yesterday from Numbers chapter 11. The children of Israel lamented, "Would that we had meat for food. We remember the fish we used to eat without cost in Egypt, and the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. But now we are famished. We see nothing before us but this manna." Manna was like coriander seed and had the color of resin. When they had gone about and gathered it up, the people would grind it between millstones or pound it in a mortar, then cook it in a pot and make it into loaves, which tasted like cakes made with oil. At night, when the dew fell upon the camp, the manna also fell. When Moses heard the people, family after family, crying at the entrance of their tents, so that the Lord became very angry, he was grieved. "Why do you treat your servant so badly?" Moses asked the Lord. "Why are you so displeased with me that you burden me with all this people? Was it I who conceived all this people? Or was it I who gave them birth, that you tell me to carry them at my bosom, like a foster father carrying an infant, to the land you have promised under oath to their fathers? Where can I get meat to give to all this people? For they are crying to me, 'Give us meat for our food.' I cannot carry all this people by myself, for they are too heavy for me. If this is the way you will deal with me, then please do me the favor of killing me at once, so that I need no longer face this distress." It appears that neither the people of Israel nor Moses are getting what they think they signed up for. They are mightily disappointed. There is division and potentials for separation. Surely Moses is feeling lonely. He is ready to accept death rather than continue leading this rabid group. And indeed, this is the thing, we can never really know what we are signing up for. If we don't get what we fantasized about, do we lapse into disappointment, which becomes loneliness? I think that this leads some people to be hesitant about signing up for anything. We hear that people today are putting off marriage later and that dating is less of a thing among Generation X. And certainly we are not seeing a great tide of religious or priestly vocations. People are not signing up like they used to. Bishop Robert Barron has said that he thinks that we are addicted to good feelings, that he thinks this is one of our spiritual problems. And I have discovered that there is a physiological and psychological side to this addiction to good feelings, this need to always feel good. And I'm not against feeling good. Dr. Anna Lemke, a psychiatrist at Stanford University, says, be it sugar, social media, or sex, the response in our brain is the same. It produces the feel-good neurochemical called dopamine, which brings on feelings of pleasure and motivation. It may be even more important for motivation than for actual pleasure. A dopamine hit brings about pleasure and then is quickly followed by pain or a come down. In order to keep us motivated, Dr. Lemke says, this balancing seesaw of pleasure and pain made sense in the time of early humans, when we had to constantly search for our basic needs. It's really an ingenious method to make sure that no matter what we do, that's pleasurable. It doesn't last very long, and it's followed by pain, so that immediately we're searching again, she explains. When we're repeatedly exposed to our pleasure-producing stimuli, our brains adjust, and eventually we need more and more just to feel normal, or to not feel in pain. That's called a dopamine deficit state. And the cycle that leads us there can actually lead to depression, anxiety, inability, irritability, and insomnia. Now, so we like to do things that make us feel good, but you can't do them all the time. There is a cycle to this. You have to be able to let go of that. You have to be able to go back to baseline normal. After a while, that's perceived as painful. Now, an interesting thing about Dr. Lemke, she is a Stanford University psychiatrist, and you know what she recommends for this is fasting. Now, we're supposed to know something about fasting in our line of work. She says, fasting from whatever it is that is bringing on the dopamine rush. So, could be sugar, could be social media, could be a lot of things. Could be using your phone, being on your phone all the time, having to check in on every social media site. But to fast from whatever it is that brings on the dopamine rush. Now, I think this might be an interesting idea to introduce when we prepare for Lent. What is it that we're using to make ourselves feel better? And can we limit our use of it, or even, in some cases, cut out our use of it? Focused fasting from things that we give ourselves to too much, such that we depend on them to feel like ourselves. The problem with expectations, too, is that we get more than we were expecting. Maybe we should say that we get other things than we were expecting. Say at 22, someone planned to marry someone attractive who could give their love to them. They could share love. They would have fun together and build a life, have a nice home, have a good job and really provide, have children and build a family. That's at 22. Then at 42, they may find themselves laid off from work, contemplating divorce due to the spouse's addiction issues, unable to really afford the home they would like, and having rebellious teenage children. Or perhaps someone enters religious life when they were 22 and thought they had really found the right community in which they can give themselves to God and to others. What a great group of people this community is, and what a tradition of service and prayer. And then at 42, there are times when they wonder where everybody is at. Everybody seems to have someplace else to be rather than in the community. Some have serious addiction and mental health problems. You may not get any good feedback from anybody about your work or your service in the community. This is disappointing. This is not getting what you expected. It's part of life. Disappointment over expectations can lead us to feelings of loneliness. I think that sin enters in here when we begin to look for someone to blame. I am surely not responsible, we say, for this feeling. And indeed, perhaps we are the victim of someone else's sin. It's right to be honest about that. But holding on to the anger and resentment that we feel compounds the sin, the separation from others and from God. This is where, okay, good. This is where forgiveness comes into this. And this isn't in my notes, so I'm ad-libbing this, but it's important. Okay. Disappointments, anger over disappointments, separation over disappointments. Now, I'll tell you a story about somebody who managed this. Now, I bet you know the book and the movie Forgiving the Dead, or The Dead Man Walking, Sister Helen Prejean and her good work. Okay, there is a woman named Debbie Morris who a few years after that came out, several years actually, wrote a book called Forgiving the Dead Man Walking. The dead man was Robert Lee Willie, rapist, serial killer, horrible person. Debbie Morris was one of his victims who survived. She was raped, she was put in the trunk of a car and taken through several states. Oddly, at the very end, they dumped her off on the street where she lived back in Louisiana. She survived this terrible ordeal. Well, you're not the same after a thing like that. She had problems with not being able to keep a job, with addiction. She lost her faith. She had been a committed Christian, lost her faith, was just in a really rough state. So she's not getting over that. Now, in the meantime, Robert Lee Willie's trial is going on, and then she knows about this Prejean woman that's taking care of this guy. That's a nail. And anyway, then there's the family of another victim. This victim didn't survive. Those people know Debbie, and they're all over her to come and attend the execution. Robert Lee Willie is finally condemned. He's going to be executed. Debbie, come with us, they say. This will make you feel better to see this guy fried. And she won't do it. She just won't do it. She goes to bed. The night of the execution, she goes to bed that night, and she prays for Robert Lee Willie and says, don't let him suffer too much. And that was the beginning. She says in her book, she says, that's the beginning where I had run out of energy to hate him. I couldn't keep it going anymore. Couldn't keep that hatred stoked. That was the beginning of a process of forgiveness. And I say, forgiveness, expectations. She said, the healing process, part of the healing process was that she would say to God, why did you let that happen to me? Why did you let them do that to me? How could you? You're supposed to be a loving God. What's wrong with you? Well, that we see prayers like that in the Psalms. We know that. And then she realized, as she puts it, she realized that she had to forgive God. And she realizes, it comes to her, the ways in which God has protected and cared for her. Good things did come to her in spite of all the horrible things, and she had been responsible for some of the bad things that happened to her. So she begins to see this balance, okay? So, now this is a magnified example of somebody whose expectations were not met and has to deal with that. But even in some of our smaller experiences, it is, I think, a matter of having to see where God has intervened. Yes, this expectation is shattered, but what other blessing is coming through to us? And this is a kind of a gentle thing to introduce to people, I think, because sometimes it takes a while to see where the good might still be coming through. So the disappointment over expectations can lead us to these feelings of loneliness. I think that if the church is to have a mission to the lonely, it needs to have a mission of forgiveness. Well, we do have a mission of forgiveness. We certainly have sacramental forgiveness. And that's an incredible ministry. Can we, through example, catechesis, and preaching, bring forgiveness out of the confessional and into the streets? God forgives through the ministry of the priest. Now, can we learn to forgive? It's mandated in Scripture. Forgive your enemies. And the interesting thing is that the beginning of Debbie's journey of forgiveness is she prays for her enemy. You know, that Sermon on the Mount, Jesus knew what he was talking about. Pray for your enemies. You can't hold abject anger and then the wishing of a blessing on someone. I don't think you can hold those things together. One is going to change the other. So, perhaps someone is caring for a spouse with a chronic disabling condition. That's difficult, even though you love her. But have you noticed other things in your life that crack open a little joy? We need to pay attention to things like that. I think that can help with loneliness. I actually know someone, I'm very close to someone in this position of caring for someone who is completely disabled. And I hear about it, and I know they really don't complain that much, but it's difficult. It changes your life. But what I often think, the other side of that is they really blame God for a lot of this. On the other side of it, I also see a whole lot of blessings there that I don't think they have completely taken account of, which I don't say, now look, you should look at the bright side, but I think I think in whatever way you can, help people see the good that's coming to them, the good that's still there in spite of this terrible disappointment. I ran across an article in a magazine from the Greater Good Science Center at the University of California. Researchers collected 26 studies of gratitude and loneliness involving nearly 10,000 people around the world, from the US to India to Portugal to Nigeria. Their results suggested that grateful people tend to be less lonely, no matter their age, their gender, or whether they live in the United States or elsewhere. If someone was above average in gratitude, they had a 62% chance of being below average in loneliness. Okay, so we're talking about forgiveness. Part of forgiveness is noticing the goodness in your life. Part of forgiveness is noticing what you can be grateful for. If we're gratitude-minded, we tend to be more tuned into the good things in our lives. So we're more likely to notice when our partner makes us a cup of coffee in the morning, or a coworker goes out of their way to help us with a report. That's important because part of the hallmark of loneliness is a distorted way of thinking where we hone in on negative feedback from other people and worry that they are judging us, rather than staying home and isolated, as the lonely sometimes do. Gratitude may actually help us seek out the support we need. Gratitude also inspires us to action, starting with thanking the person who helped us, starting with thanking God, a gesture that can strengthen the relationship further. Now, gratitude. Okay. There's a psychologist at Stanford who does a lot of work in the area of forgiveness, but in relation to this gratitude thing, he talks about anger, disappointment. It comes, in a sense, it's like your mind is a TV remote, and all day long you're watching the grievance channel, the disappointment channel. He suggests, literally, he suggests switching it to the blessings channel. You know, could you review some of that? Could you, on a day of recollection, recall those blessings, bring those blessings forward? So I think gratitude fits into that forgiveness that also is part of healing loneliness. Now, the church knows something about gratitude. Every week, every day, we offer Eucharist, thanksgiving for the gifts of God, and the greatest gift, the sacrifice of Jesus. This is kind of a sidebar. I used to do prison ministry, and I taught a lot about the sacraments, and I always taught that Eucharist means thanksgiving. Well, I taught that, and I said, where do we really say thanks in the Mass? Okay, I know, I'm a religious, I got a degree. I should know this, but I realized how important the preface is of the Eucharistic prayer in terms of determining what we are saying thanks for. The preface is really that prayer of thanksgiving, it seems to me. Anyway, important, I think, to help people focus on the Mass as a thanksgiving, as part of this movement to gratitude. So I believe that loneliness is a wound the church can help to heal. Individually and collectively, we can minister to the lonely. But I also think one approach to this individually is through the practice of hospitality. Here I'm talking about a set of skills that we can learn, I beg your pardon. I don't mean hospitality as hosting people to a social gathering, but simply as being open to people, to receiving people one-on-one, to showing openness, smiling, making eye contact, listening. Now, I feel a little like I'm channeling my mother right now, because I am remembering when I was in 4th grade, my older brother Pete got married. I had another older brother who got married when I was in kindergarten. But in kindergarten, my mother had lower social expectations of me. But by 4th grade, we got training. Shake the people's hand, say, how do you do? Look them in the eye, stand up straight, pay attention to them. So we had these training sessions, and we practiced looking at the person we were meeting, shaking their hand. That was a beginning. That was some practice for meeting people. And meeting people is the beginning of ministry and evangelization. So I think we need to look to welcoming. And I mean there are people who don't have this skill. And I think we need to talk to people about having this skill. I think it can be learned. Early in my monastic life, I was assigned to welcome day visitors to the monastery who signed up for a day-long retreat. And it began with morning prayer at 7 o'clock. Some of these people were driving 100 miles or more in the early morning to come to this. I had to be at the front door at 6:30 in the morning to greet them. I wasn't much of a morning person. Ordinarily, I don't want to greet anybody. I might not get up to greet Jesus at 6:30 in the morning. Even though generally I'm a nice person. I can recall heading down the stairs and through the corridors of the monastery to the front door of the church thinking, maybe nobody will show up. I wish I was in bed. I really don't feel like doing this. And yet, now this is boasting in the Lord, when the first people came through the door, I got a smile on my face and I was able to reach out to them and convincingly, I think, welcome them. And I think that was grace acting on my ornery self. It's possible to do that. You need a little starter, you need a little training sometimes. So you may say, well, what do ordinary basic social skills have to do with evangelization or with the church's ministry? Well, you know, I don't think this is making a big deal out of nothing. I think there are a lot of lonely people who would be healed by entering our churches, but may not feel welcome. Now, many decades ago, I separated myself from the Catholic Church as an adult. I was struggling with some issues, and I just felt I could not continue, and the years passed. I moved to the West Coast. I felt a spiritual emptiness, a longing for something. I know you could call this loneliness. Somehow, I spent some time reflecting on a number of now deceased relatives whom I loved and respected. I had such good and warm memories of these folks, and one of their outstanding characteristics was their Catholic faith. One Sunday afternoon, I was lying on my couch, and in all of this reflection, a desire formed to go to Mass. I needed to go to Mass. I said, what's the matter with me? I'm done with that. No, I need to go. I said, okay, go once, get it out of your system, and you'll be okay. I thought it was a little crazy, but I looked up a Sunday evening Mass, the last one available in Seattle that day, and I went. I slunk in and took a seat far in the back. I was not struck by lightning. The roof didn't fall in. I felt okay. It was at the sign of peace that I was really impressed. A couple of people came up to me and offered me their hand and greeted me with a smile that looked sincere. There was just a warmth to their greeting. My response was similar to that of the founder of Methodism, John Wesley, who said, "My heart was strangely warmed at the moment of his conversion." My heart was strangely warmed by this simple, welcoming gesture. I felt like I had come home to my people. Initially, I thought this was kind of a one-off thing. I would get it out of my system. But no, the greeting and the welcome extended to me by that community was like gravity pulling me back the next Sunday and the next. And this experience led to further commitments to the church, joining the parish. In a year or so, I was singing, I was lecturing, I was volunteering in the homeless shelter, and there was a new fullness, a new awareness of community in my life. Community is part of this ministry to those who are lonely. Now, I've given you an example of hospitality that led to my conversion. Many years later, after I was in religious life, I was in a big city and I went to the famous, gorgeous cathedral and walked in, and this large elderly man who was a greeter looked at me. He had bulletins. They had the Mass in them. I'll take one. "Are you going to sing?" I said, "Yeah." "All right." I never went back there. I had a choice of a number of churches to go to Mass, and I said, "This place is beautiful and a work of art, but I'm not coming here again." The next step in my re-entry into the church which was in a way about healing loneliness, was the sense of a religious vocation, which came about. I had actually had my sights set on a particular religious community, and as I was about to maybe apply to them, I made a retreat at a Benedictine monastery. I read the Rule of St. Benedict. I went to the Liturgy of the Hours. I said, "Oh, wait a minute. This is it. This is the kind of thing I want to do." At morning prayer, we prayed Psalm 72. Now, I hope I can read this without my voice breaking. "And so when my heart grew embittered, and I was cut to the quick, I was stupid and did not understand, no better than a beast in your sight. Yet I was always in your presence. You were holding me by my right hand. You will guide me by your counsel, and so you will lead me to glory." In that moment, I had a profound sense of my own sinfulness, of my acts of separation. I became very aware of bitterness in my heart, of my stupidity and my beastly behavior, and yet, like Debbie Morris experienced when she reflected on her life, yet I was always in God's presence. He was holding me by my right hand. His mercy accompanied me. I had never really been alone. And here comes that feeling of gratitude again emerging as I realized God's love for me. And I think that cultivating gratitude can be a way of ministering to and healing loneliness as we come to realize God's love for us. And we will realize that mostly through the love of other people. Community is critical to the church. I've heard Father Dennis Robinson, our president rector, speak about the importance of forming seminarians in community so that they can go out and build communities. I'm all for that. We believe that God exists as a community of three persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. There are three persons bonded together in a loving communion. We are made in God's image, in the image of this communion of love. Something that has stuck with me over the years is a line from the Catechism that states, just very simply, that through baptism, we are incorporated into the life of the Holy Trinity. So, having been incorporated into the life of the Holy Trinity, God was holding me by my right hand. But this theological truth and the mystery of the Holy Trinity has to hit the street as we minister to the world's loneliness. So, in conclusion, I'm simply saying, if we are to heal loneliness, we need to ask ourselves if people see a communion of love when they see our community. Can they see this as a place to heal, as the field hospital that Pope Francis wanted us to be? So, community, all those other things I said. Community, look at expectations, develop gratitude, develop a skill set, develop community. I think that is, as we would say in nursing, I think that's the care plan for loneliness. Thank you. We can have questions, or you can be free and go. I'll be here. I'll hang around. If anybody wants to ask me anything, that's fine. I'll hang around. But don't feel obligated either.